Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're so excited to have all of you here tonight for our English and reading workshop. So tell us in the chat, how are you doing? Where are you joining us from? We would just love to know a little bit about you. We are a whole team here with all of you tonight as we talk about the ACT. Now, the ACT may be something that feels a little bit far away for you. There have been a lot of questions surrounding this time in our lives, but I just want you to know that I am here for you. We've also got Steve, we've got Jane, we've got Nick, we've got Rich. We are all here to help support you here tonight. So we're going to get some really awesome practice. Hello, Morales. We are going to be going. So guest 6795 is asking, are we going to do practice questions or tips or both? We're going to do a little bit of both. So we're going to do kind of split it up about half English and half reading, just to kind of give you some starting points, how to jumpstart your studies and give you some tips that will apply as you are going through all of your preparation on your own. I see that many of you are going into your senior year. So, so this is really an important time for you. Lots of decisions are coming up. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, we're going to begin where you will begin on test day. And that is with the English test. Now, the English test is always first. Okay, so it's always the first thing that you will complete on this test, followed by math, then a break, then reading, science, and then if you're taking the optional writing test, there'll be a short little break in there as well. The English test is 45 minutes long, and it consists of 75 questions that are spread across 5 passages. So in terms of timing, instead of considering timing per question, we tend to think about timing per passage. So you have about 9 minutes per passage. That's for the reading and for the questions. That means that we have to learn how to tackle this efficiently. So speed and accuracy are key. Now, let's talk about, well, how do we tackle these questions? In the chat, go ahead and tell us, do you read the whole passage or do you just hunt and peck for the underlined segments? Just curious to how you approach it currently. There's actually a common school of thought that says, oh, well, this is mostly grammar. I'm just going to look for the underlined segments, right? I'm just going to look to see if there's a comma underlined, if there's a verb underlined. That's only half the story, though. There's a good chunk of questions on this test that are going to be bigger, right? They're bigger in scope. They're going to ask about the purpose of the passage. They're going to ask us about if this paragraph or this sentence is in the right place. They're going to ask us to add information or delete information, or if the information's relevant. So we actually need to read the whole thing. So, and it's not, reading with a deep dive. We're not looking like we are for reading comprehension. We're not taking notes or anything like that. We need to kind of, it's a little bit more than a skim, right? And we're reading for the big ideas. We need to kind of get the gist of the passage, and we're going to answer as we go. So we're going to start reading, and then as soon as we come to an underlined segment, then we'll stop and say, okay, well, what's up with this? What's wrong? Is there a problem? And if so, what is the problem? Then I'm going to fix it. Then we keep reading until we get to another question, and then we just repeat and keep going that way. So we read the whole passage, answering as we go. Now, the English test is going to cover many topics on the passages, but the topic of the passage is not really your primary concern. These are going to be written in a variety of styles, but our approach is the same, right? So we are reading and answering as we go, because some questions are about the underlined portions and others are about the passage or part of the passage as a whole. There are 3 big categories that this test is going to be testing you on, and that's conventions of standard English, knowledge of language, and production of writing. So something that falls underneath the umbrella of conventions of standard English, punctuation. We're going to talk about commas for a little bit. Commas are by far the most commonly tested piece of punctuation that you are going to be dealing with on this test. And many of you probably are, and actually tell us in the chat, did you learn that the rule for commas was use a comma when you would pause? I'm just curious, how many of you learned? And it's kind of a nice, gentle introduction to commas, right? If you would pause, throw in a comma, right? It's not as strong as a period. Just if you would pause, throw in a comma. And the problem with that is pausing is kind of subjective. You might think, would I pause? Would I not pause? I think my teacher would pause, but I don't think my sister would. So pausing is just, it's this very like abstract way to deal with commas. So what we actually want to do is learn the rules. There are 4 ways to use commas. If we can learn these 4 ways, then we just have to see if the sentence is using one of those. If the sentence is using one of these 4 rules, then we use the comma. If it's not, then we don't. All right, so first comma rule is to use commas to separate elements in a series or modifying elements. So here, this is probably the first comma rule that we learned. My most interesting classes this year are physics, calculus, and US history. Yes, so many of you learned that we pause, right? And we kind of do, but we need something concrete to hold on to. We need actual rules. So when we have things in a list, we use a comma. Now, just in case you're wondering, this last comma before the and is known as the Oxford comma, and it is in fact used on the ACT, which means that you use it as well. All right, another way to use a comma is with a coordinating conjunction. And we use a comma with a coordinating conjunction to separate independent clauses within a sentence. Tell us in the chat, what is an independent clause? That's really just a fancy way to say what. So here's an example. I work on Mondays and I have soccer practice on Tuesdays. So here we have a comma with a coordinating conjunction separating 2 independent clauses. And what's an independent clause? Well, an independent clause has a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. Layla, exactly. It can stand alone as a sentence. So here we have 2 individual sentences joined by a comma and a conjunction. Now, there are other coordinating conjunctions that we can use. Those are known as fanboys. And I am sure that either Steve or Nick or Jane can type the fanboys into the chat for us. The fanboys stand for and, nor, but, or, yes. So these are the words we can combine with a comma to join 2 independent clauses. All right, now we can also use a pair of commas to set off non-essential information from the rest of the sentence. Azara found, much to her delight, that the hours she spent studying were worth the effort. So this little phrase, much to her delight, it's not essential. We could take it out. The sentence would still be complete without it. So hug it with commas. It's almost like that little phrase knows it doesn't have to be there. So we need to make it feel better. Hug it with commas. You could also hug it with a pair of dashes or a pair of parentheses, but non-essential information needs to be set apart from the rest of the sentence. And then finally, commas are used to set off introductory or modifying phrases. After school, Mindy has to go straight to work. So our introductory phrase is after school. So we throw in a comma before the rest of the sentence. All right, now it's time for us to practice. And the way we're going to do this is that Steve is going to be operating a poll. So we are not going to put answers in the chat. Kind of use this as really good practice for you, almost the way you would use your grid on test day. So you're going to put your answers in the poll. And I'm just going to pause. I'm just going to stop talking for just a few seconds to give you a moment to read the sentence, see if you can identify the issue, and put your vote in that poll. When you spot the issue or the problem with the underlined segment, go ahead and just tell us what is the issue in the chat. All right, so hikers typically find that the climb takes at least 3 hours. All right, so I'm seeing in the chat, Jessica, Amy, Grayson, Hunter, a couple of the guests. Yeah, we have commas where there don't need to be commas. If we think back to our list, do we have items in a list? No. Do we have a comma with a fanboy, like with 2 independent clauses? No. Do we have non-essential information? No. Do we have an intro phrase? No. So we can use those rules as a checklist. We can just go check, 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 check. None of those ways to use a comma appear in the sentence. So there are no commas necessary. By the way, whenever there is a problem with the underlined segment, answer choice A or F, depending on the question, is gone. So you really only have 3 choices to analyze. B still has a comma and D still has a comma. The one we're looking for here is the one that most of you picked. Awesome job. Answer choice C. Just remove all the commas. Hikers typically find that the climb takes at least 3 hours. All right, good stuff. Now let's talk about some more punctuation. Commas are the most commonly tested piece of punctuation. Up next is the semicolon. Now, semicolons are used to join independent clauses. Semicolons, unlike commas, work alone. They don't need or require a coordinating conjunction. So in between the 2 independent clauses, you just plunk a semicolon. So when I see a semicolon underlined, here's what I do. I think back to when I was like 5 or 6 and think back to what do your parents say before you cross the street, right? They tell you to look both ways. So if you see a semicolon underlined, just look both ways. If you have an independent clause on each side, your semicolon is used appropriately. Like this sentence here. Fall is my favorite season. Watching the leaves change and going to football games makes me happy. 2 independent clauses, semicolon in the middle. Now, another acceptable, but definitely a more rare use of the semicolon is to separate items in a complex list. So this is like if we have a list of lists. When my friends came over for breakfast, I served eggs, bacon, and toast, cereal, grits, and oatmeal, and strawberries, mangoes, and apples. So we've got like a list of like your standard breakfast fare, a list of like grains, and then we have a list of fruits. Those lists for clarity are separated with semicolons. Now, apostrophes. When do we use apostrophes? Apostrophes show possession. So for possessive nouns, possessive pronouns do not use apostrophes. Apostrophes are also used to replace 1 or more letters in a contraction. So can't, don't, couldn't, wouldn't, shouldn't. They can also be used to form the plural of single letters and numbers. So if you said like, there are 2 7s in my phone number, that there would be an apostrophe in 7s. So after Skylar took the ACT, he went to his friend's house. The house belongs to the friend. The friend has ownership of his house. So we use an apostrophe to show possession. All right, let's go ahead and practice. Again, you're going to read. You're not going to put any answers into the chat. In the chat, though, please tell us what issue, if any, exists in this sentence. And when you know how to fix it, please put your vote in the poll. And Emily's asking a great question. Can we use this information for SAT as well? You bet. So many of these skills kind of overlap. There are distinct differences between the exams, but what you're learning here is definitely applicable to the SAT. All right, let's go ahead and see, let's kind of unpack what we've got going on here. Even the parts of a chili vary. The seeds and the veins of a pepper are hotter than the flesh. Now, you may not know exactly what the issue is at first. When that happens, let the answer choices help you. In these answer choices, I'm seeing a conjunction, comma, semicolon. When I see these types of punctuation and conjunctions, what we want to do is look for independent clauses. Do I have independent clauses here? Ananya saying independent clauses have to be separated by a semicolon. So let's go ahead and see what we have going on here. Even the parts of a chili vary. That's an independent clause. That could stand alone as a complete sentence. The seeds and veins of a pepper are hotter than the flesh. That's another complete sentence. So yep, and guess 14, we do. This is a run-on. This is a run-on because I have two independent clauses with nothing in between them. So all these other choices, they're trying to fix it. They're doing their best. But answer choice G is missing the comma. It gives me a conjunction, but no comma. Answer choice H gives me a comma, but no conjunction. So how do we fix it? Well, again, it's the one that most of you picked. We just plunk a semicolon right between those two independent clauses. Awesome job. All right. Now we're not done with punctuation yet. In addition to commas and semicolons and apostrophes, we're also going to see colons on the test. Now you use a colon before a list if the information before the list is an independent clause. So the way this has to work is we have to have an independent clause. That's what IC stands for. Independent clause, then the colon, and then whatever comes after it. Like this example here. Before driving to the test center, I checked that I had packed what I needed. That's an independent clause. And then we have our list, extra pencils, a pencil sharpener, my calculator, snack, and everything else on my list. Now, colons can also be used between an independent clause and then other information that modifies or adds to it. But notice we still have an independent clause first, and then whatever comes after the colon. As I stood in front of the painting, I wondered, who decides what qualifies as art? So notice we actually have two independent clauses here, but the second one is modifying or giving us more information about the first. Use a colon also to precede direct quotations, business salutations, and titles. Again, though, we have to have an independent clause before the colon. It seemed like every other senior picked the same yearbook quote. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. So independent clause, colon, and then whatever comes after it. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at another question, another test-like format. Question number 3, please read what you see here on the screen. In the chat, tell us what issue, what problem do you see? And in the poll, go ahead and put in your votes for how to fix it. Michaela, you ask a great question. So Michaela says, when there's a list in a sentence, I've seen some people put a comma before the and others who don't. There is sort of a debate in the grammar world about whether or not we should use that comma. That comma is called the Oxford comma. And your teachers may have a preference one way or another. The ACT does use that comma though. So at least in terms of preparing for this test, use that comma before the and. So thank you for asking that question, Michaela. All right, let's see what's going on here. Not all visitors, however, have been so welcome. Years ago, an escaped convict made his way to her mountain retreat and threatened her. So we've got commas, right? There's a comma as part of my underlined segment. And then my answer choices, there's a semicolon, a colon, and then another choice with a comma. Punctuation tells me I need to start looking at clauses. So when you're studying punctuation, your ability to identify independent and dependent clauses is really like the foundation. It's the skill that's hiding underneath the punctuation rules. Tell us in the chat, how many independent clauses do we have in this sentence? Is there just one or is there two? Not all visitors, however, have been so welcome. Years ago, an escaped convict made his way to her mountain retreat and threatened her. How many complete standalone sentences do we have here? Well, right after the word welcome, we could put a period, right? So if you're ever unsure of like, do I have an independent clause or not? Just ask yourself, well, could I put a period here? Would this be okay? So yep, K, Sarayu, guest 14, L, this is two independent clauses. All right, well, two independent clauses cannot be joined together by just a little comma all by itself. Commas, they try their best, but they are not strong enough to hold up two independent clauses. So we need to fix this. D does not fix the original issue. D is still a comma. It just adds another word. So that does not fix our problem. Now B gives us a semicolon. But if I add the word since, the second clause is no longer independent. Listen, since years ago, an escaped convict made his way to her mountain retreat and threatened her. And then we're like left wondering, well, what's the complete thought, right? Since this happened, what's happening because of that? So answer choice B fixes one problem and causes another. So we really have to watch out for answer choices that do that. So now, even if you were unsure of how to use the colon, you have eliminated your way right to the correct answer. This is correct because we have an independent clause. We have an IC, we've got a colon, and then we've got the second independent clause. It's modifying, it's giving us more information about the first because it's telling us why the visitors are not welcome. All right, let's talk a little bit about grammar. Now, the subject and verb of a sentence, they must match. They have to match in person and number. So subjects and verbs can use first person, second person, or third person. All right, I am so glad that you are finding these helpful. That's awesome. I am playing golf. You are playing golf. Third person, they are playing golf. Now we also have to match in number, and this is where singular versus plural come in. Singular nouns need singular verbs, and plural nouns need plural verbs. She works really hard at practice. They work really hard at practice. And pronouns can also be subjects of the sentence as well. So singular matches with singular, plural matches with plural. All right, here's another one for us. So this one we have a little bit more to read. So go ahead and read what you see here. And I'm going to give you a clue. Anytime on this test that you see a verb underlined, you are going to check for two things. You are going to look to see, is this verb in the proper tense? And then you're going to ask yourself, does this verb agree with its subject? So ask yourself those two guiding questions as you look at number 4. Tell us in the chat, what's the issue? And put your vote in our poll. Our verb doesn't agree with our subject. Awesome. Okay. So each species have a different size, shape, color, and heat. Now the subject of this sentence is a little bit odd, but the subject is actually each. Each has. And really, you can predict the answer for these, right? We know how to match up a subject and a verb. So we go to our answer choices and we need the one that creates agreement. Well, answer choice F does not agree. Having doesn't match, and we don't have any reason to change the verb tense. If we look at the other verb tenses in the area, or in the surrounding sentences, most vegetables taste. Simple present tense. That's what we're looking for here. That leaves us right to our correct answer of answer choice H. Nicely done. J, no, we cannot omit, right? We cannot omit because then we wouldn't have a verb in the sentence and then it would be a fragment. So has is singular and have is plural. So if we said like she has a puppy, right? She has a puppy. And maybe we're talking about maybe a group of siblings versus they have a puppy. If there's more than one, we would use have. Now I did see the question. Can we explain who versus whom? You bet. Who is in the same category of pronouns as he, she, and they. These are all subjective pronouns and they can be used as the subject of a sentence. So if you could replace the pronoun with a he, a she, or a they, you use who. For example, if we said, who was on the phone? Who was on the phone? Well, we could say he is on the phone. We could say she is on the phone. We could say they are on the phone. So we know that who is correct. If the sentence said, though, with whom are you speaking? This one we would replace, I'm speaking with him. I'm speaking with her. I'm speaking with them. Him, her, them, and whom are all objective pronouns. they receive an action, they act as the object of a verb or the object of a preposition. The easy way to remember that is him, them, and whom all end with an M. So just use that little replacement trick, and that'll help you with these subjective versus objective pronouns. All right, let's keep talking about grammar and usage. We've got one more little thing to talk about before we move on to our reading. So looking at pronouns. Pronouns must be in the correct case. So what that means is that the pronoun has to match the noun that the pronoun is replacing. He made dinner for himself because his parents were working late. Here are some more examples of who versus whom, right? Let's take a look at this sentence here. I'd be happy to write to the person who interviewed you. Who interviewed you? He interviewed you. She interviewed you. They interviewed you. You could replace with he, she, they. So who is correct? To whom should I address this letter? Well, we could address the letter to him, to her, to them. So whom is correct? All right, now that versus which. Let's talk about this. That is used for essential elements to the sentence. Smoothies that have strawberries and raspberries are my favorite. This is essential information because it's telling us exactly the kind of smoothies that are this person's favorite. Let's take a look at when we use which. Smoothies are often made with a variety of ingredients, which can make them a healthy breakfast option. This part after the comma, so which comes after a comma, by the way. This part after the comma is not essential. We could put a period right here after ingredients and still have a complete sentence. So who and whom are used for people, that and which are used for things. That's the distinction there. And make sure your nouns agree with the noun, or your pronouns agree with the nouns that they're replacing. The students go to their homes after school. So there matches up with plural students. All right, question number 5. Let's take a look. Go ahead and in the chat, tell us what issue you spot and vote it up for the winning answer in our poll. All right, let's see how we did on number 5 here. The words of a novel or poem are literally bound within their pages. Well, THERE, that's like a location. I could point to it. It's over there. So I know right off the bat that even if I wanted to consider there, this form of there is not okay. Okay. And peep, I love it. Peep is pointing back to, hey, well, and we can ask ourselves, what is the thing that has pages? Like what has pages? And it's a novel or poem, singular. That points us right to answer choice B. The words of a novel or poem are literally bound within its pages. So we have to be careful here because the subject of our sentence is plural, right? But words don't have pages. The pages are pointing back to the novel or the poem. Exactly, guess 27. That's the wrong there. So this makes sense. Now, I did see the question a couple times. Do we always cross out option A or F for underlined questions? No. No change is just as likely to be correct as any other answer choice. So whenever there is a problem, answer choice A is eliminated. Answer choice F is eliminated. But if there's no problem, then that's the one that we pick. All right. Oh, good question. The difference between it's and its. IT' would stand for it is. So whenever I see IT', I just plug in the subject-verb pair, it is. If that works, then I know that the apostrophe is correct. If that doesn't work, then you're going to go with the possessive form of its, ITS. All right. Now we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit for the remainder of our time. Let's talk reading. Now the reading test is always third, right after break. So there's kind of like, you may be getting tired at this point because you've been testing for a while, but it is right after break. So if you learn to use your breaks wisely, get up out of your seats, have a nutritious snack that's not like overly caffeinated or overly full of sugar, you're going to be in really great shape for the reading test. Now, we have to read efficiently. We have to read aggressively because we've got 35 minutes for 40 questions. And it's not just 40 questions, there's 4 passages, right? So we have just under 9 minutes per passage. That includes the reading and the 10 questions that go along with it. So one thing you can always do to improve your reading is just the more you read, the better you get at it. It's just one of those things, right? So when you have time to read, read. You don't necessarily have to always read ACT practice passages, but just read more in general. And Kay, yes, we are going to actively read. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. The reading test contains passages that cover several topics: social studies, humanities, natural science, and literary narratives. The same reading technique applies to every single passage. It's so important when you read these passages for you to know. You don't have to memorize the details. You don't have to memorize the facts. You don't have to actually learn the material in the passage. You have to be able to determine the main idea, find and interpret important details, make inferences based on the text, and analyze the author's voice and mood methods. We don't have to memorize this stuff because the passage is still there. So we're going to read the passage for the big picture, and then we're going to go back, and we're always going to find support for our answers as we go. We get to go back, right? These passages don't disappear. And I love what Nick has in the chat. It's not about how fast you read, it's about how well you read. Are you reading well? So what does reading well look like? Let's take a look. Now we do have a question on the screen, okay? So I really kind of want you to do your best to avoid looking at that for a moment. Let's just like focus here on this paragraph. Now we always want to read the blurb. This is a humanities passage adapted from Indira Ganesan's essay, Resisting My Family History, which appeared in Glamour magazine. As I read, I want you to tell us in the chat, in 5 words or less, what is this paragraph about? What's the main idea of this paragraph? Though I'd been born there, I didn't want to go to India. What I wanted was to knock on a Broadway producer's door and say, I'm brown, I'm talented, let me write you a play. My parents, however, I'm going to circle that word. Words like this are important. My parents, however, believed I needed to embrace my Indian past. I wanted only to escape it, as I wanted to escape anything that spoke to me of tradition or old-fashioned ideas. I was too cool for India. All right, how can we sum up this paragraph with not a complete sentence, nothing that needs to impress the graders? This is just a note to help you stay focused on the big idea. And guest 6333 is asking, should we read the questions first? Do not read the questions first. Do not. So if there was only one question, I'd say, yeah, read it first. But you're not going to be able to remember 10 questions while you read an unfamiliar passage. It's not an efficient way to handle it. you're going to spend more time than you may initially think. Peep says family history, person who wanted to be an actor. She doesn't want to live by the way her parents want. She wants to follow her dream to Broadway. Family, following dream, getting away from past. Beautiful. We all have different words, but we're all getting at the same idea. You've all done it. As you read, this is what we want you to do. We want you, so this is my test day scribbles here, because it doesn't have to be legible to anyone else. In the margin, you are going to jot down what is each paragraph about. You're going to do this as you read. It's not an extra step, right? Not an extra step. You're just going to jot down, and this is going to keep you focused. It's going to keep you active and engaged in the passage. Because tell us in the chat, have you ever read a passage with your eyeballs? Okay, and you can just give us a yes or no, or a smiley face or a sad face. Have you ever read a passage with your eyeballs? Like you are decoding printed words on a paper. And then something happens where you get to the end and you don't know what you just read. Has that ever happened to you guys? And you're like, I think it was a science passage. I don't know. Like your brain was somewhere else. Your brain was thinking about the next time you can go on vacation. Your brain is thinking about ordering a pizza. Your brain is thinking about literally anything aside from the passage that you are supposed to read. If we get in the habit of circling keywords and underlining key phrases, it's going to keep us focused. We are forcing our brains to get in the passage. So take concise notes. It's not going to take you extra time with practice. It may at first, but here's something I do promise you. Even if taking notes adds a few seconds to your reading time, right, Nick? The thing is, it's not going to take as much time as having to read the whole passage a second time because we weren't really paying attention the first time. And it happens. Our minds want to think about other things. These are not usually very thrilling passages. So we have to force our brains to get with it. And that's how we do it. All right. Let's take a look at question number 1. We're going to find support in the passage. So Steve's going to open up a poll. The passage states, this is a really nice phrase. The passage states tells me that the answer is literally stated or printed on the paper. Instead of traveling to India after graduating from high school, the narrator had hoped to. Okay, so now I'm going to go back. What did she want to do? Well, literally, what I wanted was to knock on a Broadway producer's door and say, I'm brown, I'm talented. Let me write you a play. That's our answer. We found our answer. Time to match it up. Now we go to our answer choices. Answer choice A, attend college in New York. Careful, careful. It says Broadway, but it doesn't say she wants to go to college in New York. B, become a playwright. She wants to write a play. That's it. Become a playwright. It says nothing about traveling in the US. And D could be tempting, but it doesn't say she wants to act in a Broadway play. She wants to write a play. All right. Emily, how often should we summarize? Paragraph by paragraph. Unless it's maybe dialogue where technically each paragraph is like a switch of a speaker, then you could kind of summarize more chunks at a time. All right, let's keep this going. Now, this is part of the same passage. So don't get hung up on the question. Let's just read this paragraph together. I'm going to read it, and I would like for you to tell us in the chat, how could we sum this up? Just in a few words or less. Summarize all the events that are happening here. I attended a wedding. I watched some of the funeral preparations following the death of my great uncle. I climbed 500 steps to reach a Jain temple, where a priest gave me a blessing that translated roughly as you'll have 7 years of good luck, followed by 7 years more of the same. During a 10-day tour of famous temples, I saw a snake charmer in a parking lot and visited an entire city of priests and ascetics. They led us into a temple sanctum sanctorum where we saw the God image in all its splendor. So she's doing a lot of things here. This is a paragraph that's full of details, and Jane and Nick and Rich and Steve and I, we don't want you to write the details down. We want you to kind of like figure out what are all these details telling us. So tell us in the chat, how would you summarize these details? So we've got, she went to a wedding, funeral preparation. She climbed a bunch of steps for a temple. She received a blessing. She saw a snake charmer. She went into a temple sanctum sanctorum. So yeah, like someone describing their trip, experience, her travels, journey, the things she did. It's kind of like she's saying, hey, look at the cool things I did, right? Like if this was like an Insta story or something, like, hey, check this out. Here I am here, here I am here. Like this is all the cool things she did in India, right? That's what we would write down. Okay, now it's time for the question. Information in the 6th paragraph, that's this paragraph right here, supports the narrator's claim. So now we have to find all these details. What claim do these details support? Answer choice A, and when you have your answer, go ahead and lock it in the poll. Her trip to India was an adventure. Wedding, funeral, climbing temple steps, blessing, snake charmer, temple sanctum sanctorum. I mean, come on, like if that's not an adventure, I don't know what is, right? Awesome work. Yes, G and H and J, there is no support in this paragraph for any of these other ideas. It doesn't talk about her missing the US. It doesn't say how everyone knew she was actually an American. And it doesn't say that she was determined to dislike India. This paragraph, they tell us which paragraph to find our support in. So we go to this paragraph, we find the support, and we get this point. This is awesome. All right, let's continue. As I read these 2 paragraphs, again, in the chat, tell us, how would we sum these up? And some of you, I do see the question, and Nick did a really great job answering it, but just in case you didn't see it, how do we know what's important? What's important is the main idea, the big idea, right? What is the main idea of this paragraph? What's the main idea of that paragraph? We're not going to write down the details, right? It's like if you had to explain what the passage was about to someone that hadn't read it. That's how you would answer this. Just a little concise summary. In India, I had the unswerving consideration of my relatives, 25 of whom I met in my first 6 months. I remember our meals together and the preparations. In America, I picked at the pizza and baked ziti on the school lunch menu. In India, I feasted. There were scores of delicious meals, piles of snacks and tins, water always available in an earthen vessel in the kitchen. David, yes, good memories, right? She was well cared for. She's got her relatives, all these like warm, like food-filled, family-filled memories. Well done. That's exactly along the lines of what I would write. Okay, and then our next paragraph. And I still felt I was missing out on a superlative year in America. And I was determined to dislike India. I dragged my aunt to see a Steven Spielberg movie and felt it superior to Indian films, even though they managed to reduce me to tears. So this paragraph is about her missing America, right? India versus America. I like that. Guess 6333. Kim, do not write in full sentences. These notes are just for you. No one else has to be able to read them or understand them. These are for you to keep you focused. All right, let's answer the question. The passage suggests. Now this phrase tells me that the answer, it won't be directly stated, but it's going to be supported. It's kind of like they're suggesting this idea. The narrator dragged her aunt to a Steven Spielberg movie. Okay, I know I'm going to be down here in this paragraph because, so I dragged my aunt to see a Steven Spielberg movie. Here's the sentence where she does this thing. So let's read before it and see why. Why does she drag her aunt to see a Steven Spielberg movie? Well, I was missing America. I was determined to dislike India. This is our support. We're going to use this sentence as support as we look for our answer. Answer choice A. The narrator refused to attend Indian movies. We don't know that. It doesn't tell us. And actually, it says that she felt it superior to Indian films. So at some point, she's seen Indian movies. Answer choice B. Her aunt did not know who Steven Spielberg was. We know zero about this aunt, except that she went to the movie. That's it. We don't know if she knew who Steven Spielberg was. Answer choice C. The narrator was determined to cling to the American culture she left behind. That sounds an awful lot like missing something, doesn't it? Determined to cling to something that she's missing. That's our winner. And that's, again, almost all of you got it. This method works. Awesome job. Answer choice D says the narrator wanted to prove that Indian values were just as important as American values. The author's not trying to prove anything here, right? She just wanted to see a movie because she missed America. All right. Now, let's talk about another question type. And again, I'm seeing the question, how do you know the important words to highlight? Important ideas are the main ideas. If it's a detail, don't worry about it. On the previous question, so guess 3616, I underlined all these things after the question pointed me back to this area. And you don't have to underline these when you're answering the questions. If it's helpful, you can, right? I just wanted to point out, boom, there is actual support for these answers in the passage. Something I do always circle, though, are transition words like however, for example, in conclusion, thus, words like that. And Nick is saying the same thing. Those words tend to surround important ideas because authors use them when they have something important to say. All right. Now, question 4. We're going to take a look at a couple of specific questions, specific types of questions. Number 4 says, as it is used in line 17, the word ravages most nearly means. These questions are known as vocab and context questions. When we see questions like this, and we'll encounter them, again, we read the passage first, but when we encounter these questions, we always go back to the sentence that contains the word. And we know that the author's going to ask us, or the question rather, is asking us about how the author used this word in this specific sentence, in this specific way. So you need to get away from the idea that the common definition is going to be correct, because it's not going to be the common definition. It's going to be the definition that matches how the author used the word. Okay, so let's go back to the sentence that contains the word ravages. Thus, while one may be horrified by the ravages of developmental disorder or disease, one may sometimes see them as creative too. Just go ahead and tell us in the chat, are we going to look for a positive or a negative answer for question number 4? Are we looking for a positive or a negative? This is going to help us eliminate 2 of the choices right off the bat. And Steve's going to open up the poll for number 4 also, by the way. So what are some clues for this question? We're talking about being horrified. We're talking about disorder, disease. Those all point to something negative. So what we can do is get rid of any choices that are either neutral or positive. Paradoxical and creative aren't negative enough, right? I love it. Sam, Isabella, Jessica, Sarah, Pete, you got it. Guess 14, the word horrified is a big clue, isn't it? So it's either H or J. One of these answer choices takes it a bit too far. Make sure you pick the one that does not take it too far. If we take a look, we've got fatal nature or destructive actions. Answer choice H, it goes too far. It is definitely negative, but we're not talking about everything being fatal, right? Because if we look at the rest of the sentence, one may sometimes see them as creative too. Well, if we're horrified by the fatal nature, if something's deadly, we're not going to be looking for a creative aspect. Destructive actions is still negative. And it allows for the ability for one to also kind of maybe look at the bright side as well. Guess 2506, is the positive or negative tip something always to use for vocab and context or just for this question? Whenever you have a charged word, so an overtly positive or an overtly negative, use that tip. That'll help you a lot. So we have to match the tone of the passage when we're reading. All right, let's go ahead and try another one. You guys are really you're doing an amazing, amazing job. Question number 5. As it's used in line 43, the word compensation most nearly means. This uniqueness transforms the minus of a handicap into the plus of compensation. The poll is open. Let's look at our clues here. We're talking about the minus of a handicap. And we're contrasting that with the plus of something. So we know our answer choice needs to be positive. Now for number 5, there's something I want to make sure that we talk about. Compensation does have a pretty common meaning. Compensation often refers to getting paid for doing a job, right? So like if you do your chores, you may want to get compensated. If you mow your neighbor's lawn, you may want to get compensated. You may want payment. We're not talking about anything related to money here, so we know that that common definition is gone. So what does compensation mean? So it's something that's going to contrast with a handicap. We've got differentiation. And differentiation is more about like kind of separating and having different groups, different levels of things. Someone's disposition is sort of like their vibe, their persona. People may be described as having a sunny disposition or a sulking disposition, right? One or the other. And then adaptation, handicap, adaptation is a positive, right? If we're talking about the minus of a handicap, if we contrast that with the plus of, okay, well, here's a handicap, but here's how we can get around it. Here's what we can do instead. Answer choice D is what we're looking for. Awesome job tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your night with us. I hope that this English and reading practice has been helpful for you. I know that Nick and Jane and Steve and Rich and I enjoyed this. So thanks for trusting us. Keep prepping, keep staying healthy, and keep staying safe. And we hope to see you around the ACT world sometime soon. Have a great rest of your night.